1:30 John, filthy true crime hit a new high with the story of how Deborah Newell's romance with a charming man spiraled into horror. Alarm bells rang when she came home to find a strange woman in her house, and the lies kept coming. So, why was his nickname Filthy? That is not the only revelation this tense unraveling gets the listener, but it is enough to have you screaming, "No! Don't trust him!" Into your device. To STown, Chapter 1. From the moment the much-anticipated STown was released, it became the most bingeable pod of 2017. Surpassing the intrigue of Serial. This scene-setter showcases Brian Reed's expert storytelling and sets up the complicated characteristics of uppity horologist John B. McLemore and, no spoilers here, by the end it is apparent that the narrative won't go in the direction that was originally intended. 3. The Heart, Bodies, Meet Jonathan Sendi's confessional about being fat, is a story that stays with you long after you've stopped listening. He's happy, he's healthy and he's loving life. How can I see my weight as a problem when it's never been a problem for me? He asks, before delving into some uncomfortable truths about why society has such a hatred for people who don't conform to a certain size. Every moment is moving, anger-inducing and authentic. 4. Pod Save America, Obama's last interview. It's no surprise that Obama's former aides and speechwriters John Favreau, Dan Pfeiffer, Tommy Vietor and John Lovett secured his last, relaxed and revealing interview as president. There's a feeling that the gang have a powwow in many a White House wing together, and it's impossible not to admire Obama when he talks about the hard piece of business that was passing the Affordable Care Act or making the handover of power to that other fella as smooth as possible. 5. Ear Hustle, the Boom Boom Room. Every episode of Ear Hustle, the podcast from inside San Quentin Prison, is compelling, witty and non-judgmental. This one focuses on in prison and goes beyond what soft-voiced host Earl Unwich describes as dropping the soap, and all that bullshit. It don't go down like that. It's all about conjugal visits and there's incredible sadness as one inmate wishes for some soft, fluffy pillows and to see his lover's face in daylight. 6. The Two Shot podcast. Vicky McClure. Craig the Caddy Parkinson is as far away from his sinister line of duty character as it gets as an interviewer. His co-star, the sparkingly down-to-earth Vicky McClure, sips a brew in her slippers as they chat about her childhood ambitions, getting a big break in Shane Meadows' A Room for Romeo Brass and why she'd only be found below stairs if she ever got a part in Downton Abbey. It's refreshingly luby-free. 7. Missing, Richard Simmons. Where's Richard? When Dan Taberski's search for the eccentric, lycra-loving fitness guru first burst onto the scene, it was fizzing with fun and intrigue. Fond of mantras such as "sweat is just fat crying," Simmons didn't turn up to an exercise class in 2014 and was never seen again. Taberski's podcast, which was later branded morally suspect by The New York Times, became an instant hit thanks to his fondness for the man himself and knack for storytelling. 8. The Adam Buxton podcast. Sharon Horgan. Dr. Buckle's podcast is reliably great, but catching Sharon Horgan just as she was making Motherland is fantastic. There are ramble chats and a lot of honesty, and listening to it is like passing an hour with a couple of funny mates when you don't remember what you talked about afterwards. Meeting Sarah Jessica Parker, dodgy massages and getting hiked into dresses for award ceremonies are all covered, with Horgan's dirty laugh adding an extra layer of joy. 9. Homo Sapiens. Rebecca Root. Will Young and Christopher Sweeney are the quintessential entertaining chumps who charm the ears with their LGBT+ answer to Woman's Hour. Rebecca Root is a particularly revealing guest with a willingness to talk about her love life, getting her big break as a trans actor and being called made in shops. It's all done with a big dose of humor and Will's welcome propensity to meander into anecdotes from the pop world. 10. Under the Skin with Russell Brand. Ruby Wax, Madness and Meditation. Russell Brand's latest incarnation sees him in thoughtful mode, picking the most fascinating guests and then sitting back and learning from them. Ruby Wax talks about mental health and mindfulness, using her own experience as a catalyst. She predicts a future with mental fitbits and talks a whole lot of sense. 11. The Butterfly Effect. The fallow years between teen and MILF. John Ronson's exploration of the industry is as far from salacious as it gets, and this episode is a sad realization that women become redundant when they don't fit into search terms. The solution? Filming custom-made clips for men with exact, and sometimes unconventional, specifications. 12. The Guilty Feminist. Getting older with Jenny Eclair. Every time Jenny Eclair catches sight of her daughter's underarm hair, it reminds her of their pet hamster. so she's the perfect guilty feminist guest. Deborah, Frances White and Cindy V hear about Miriam Margolyes's luxurious bush, high blood pressure and the quest to find a hobby in your mid-50s. 13 Embedded, Trump Stories. Kelly McEvers brings a new perspective to Donald Trump's rise to power, from The Apprentice contestants admiring his gold toilet to the questionable words he uttered in the footage found on the cutting room floor. The tale of him rescuing a Los Angeles golf course and then trading insults with locals is a car crash. 14 My Dad Wrote a Porno. Stephen Mangan, a celebrity guest who appreciates the smutty joy of ndwap, is always a saucy treat, and Stephen Mangan's appearance is a no exception. Giggling hosts Jamie Morton, Alice Levine and James Cooper are shocked when they the extent of Prince Charles and Camilla's flirtation for the first time thanks to Mangan. 15 Heavyweight. Jesse gained a new appreciation of life after he was run over by a car and came close to death. 4 years later he's on a mission to find the driver and thank him for the new life he gave him. Jonathan Goldstein wonders if he's giving out the Jesus-y vibe but is here to help. 16 Frankie Boyle's The Prometheid, Volume 1. The cackling volcano of evil is on fine form in this hour of stand-up with the kind of jokes that would be cut from a telebroadcast. Stay well away if you don't want to hear the phrase masturbating necrophile or beyond the knuckle barbs about Prince Philip, but if you do, dive in and enjoy. 17 Hot Mic with Dan Savage, Boys in the Band, featuring Dan Bukatinsky. The ever-wise Dan Savage mixes stand-up clips with sage advice in his podcast about strap-ons, jacuzzi parties, divorce, dominatrices, love and marriage and babies. Dan Bukatinsky's story about coming out years after a brief teenage experience with a boy from his marching band is bittersweet and well worth telling. 18 The Nod. Hunter Green Fong. Listening to this episode will give you the tools to surfboard like Beyonce. It's just cowgirl in a bathtub, and the alarming knowledge that there's someone out there who writes fan fiction about erstwhile boy band B2K. Co-hosts Brittany Luz and Eric Eddings are all kinds of fun as they bring on the black with a capital B experience. 19 Broken Record, Walk on Water. Rick Rubin and Malcolm Gladwell's story behind the song podcast is only 15 minutes long, but nails Eminem's creative struggle making his new album. By the time they unleash Walk on Water, Eminem's talked about his early days as a nerdy kid, rapping like LL Cool J, and how Beyoncé agreed to sing the chorus. 20 Slow Burn, Martha, Slate/iTunes, Are We Living Through the Next Watergate? Slate's episode about Martha Mitchell, the wife of one of Richard Nixon's closest allies, shows how dissenters were silenced during the crisis. It's shocking to hear how she was drugged and imprisoned, but it's a timely lesson in how power corrupts. 21 The Thread with Ozzy, the murder of John Lennon. The first episode on a journey to connect John Lennon with Vladimir Lenin delivers an evocative recollection of the day the Beatle was shot. It's made even more poignant by the feeling that Lennon had finally found happiness living largely unbothered in New York when Mark Chapman struck. 22 The Good Life Project, Tim Ferriss, Halfway Through Life, What Really Matters. Podcast legend Tim Ferriss imparts the wisdom that comes from turning 40 and spells out his rules for life. If you need a reminder to love yourself and stop procrastinating over taking that dream trip or leaving a rubbish relationship, here's one that'll hit you like a massive, but well-meaning hammer. 23 The Animals, David Hockney's giant portrait. Simon Callow and Alan Cumming are majestic as Christopher Isherwood and Don Baggerty, who are openly gay in 1950s Hollywood. Rocky romance and sadness is balanced by a glamorous cast of characters who pop up, and here David Hockney begins a portrait of the couple but struggles when Dan is called away. 24 The Joe Rogan Experience, Russell Brand. There's a feeling that 2.5 hours of Rogan and Brand doesn't even scratch the surface of the questions they want to ask, but it's a solid start. Is dogging a desperate attempt to connect with nature? Should people live in tribes? And the biggie, can money solve your problems? 25 Nancy, like two Ken dolls being smashed together. This is not Will and Grace, the podcast. Say hosts, Kathy Tu and Tobin Lowe, and that's illustrated by the story of a woman who's reunited with the cool shop owner she had a crush on as a 12-year-old. Seeing a very charming, confident gay adult allowed me to imagine an adult version of myself, she says.